All right, everyone, let's get going. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to episode 43 of This Week is Live. So glad to see you well. I'm your host, Raymond Flotat from mxdwn.com. That's Mixdown. Thanks for joining us. There's a ton of stuff to get into, all kinds of really interesting things going on right now, and most importantly, the realms of television and movies. So, for those of you that are fans of TV and movies, which means most of America, probably most of America, some people maybe not so much for TV, but generally people like to watch TV nowadays. There's a very big piece of news for you, everything that you're interested in. So let's dive right into it. First and foremost, this week, starting on Sunday night on the 24th, the AMPTP and the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, had announced a tentative agreement as far as resolving their long running strike. Now, this has been going on for several months and pretty much brought the entire, movie and television business to a complete standstill. Things could not be wrapped up, things could not be finished, things could not be shot. Even talk shows weren't able to happen as a part of this because of course talk shows have writers, and the jokes or the bits, the vignettes that they're dealing with have writers that help populate them. So not even late night comedy shows were happening. Everything kind of ground to a halt. Movies and TV shows galore either delayed for a long time or put on hold until the things could be resolved. And then, of course, following that, the Screen Actors Guild, SAG-AFTRA, also went on strike. Now, that strike's still not resolved, but as of this week, there was an interim agreement announced, and then the agreement was voted on, and ultimately, the board of the guild for the WGA has approved this agreement. Now, most likely this means it will pass, but that does not necessarily mean it will, of course, because this has to go to the union members. The membership has to vote on it democratically to say, yes, we're okay with this agreement. Now, if the leadership of the guild is, most likely they will, but that vote is going to take place between October 2nd and October 9th. What it does mean in the meantime is that for all points and purposes, people can, who are writers in the entertainment business, return to work, even if maybe in terms of some TV and movies, there isn't anything that can be shot because, of course, you've got no acting talent that can be there. You can't be shot. But this does mean certain talk shows can return. But they're at least able to return to work while this is ongoing and the vote for the membership begins to roll through. I would be surprised personally. I don't know anything, and I'm certainly not a WGA member. I would be surprised if it doesn't pass at this point. And part of the reason why is because of the terms of the deal. Now, this has been a kind of a big sticking point in terms of everything that this was going to be. And one of the major issues within this negotiation was artificial intelligence. And not just ChatGPT, as you've heard about, but the ability to use artificial intelligence to create content. And of course, the lingering fear many people in America and the world have right now that they could be fully replaced by very cheap AI software, as opposed to the human level of work put into, in this case, writing content. So, as a part of this deal, which I have to admit, their negotiators must be great because I did not expect to hear this much progress in terms of what they got for an arrangement. Or perhaps the TV and movie companies are feeling the hit that bad because content is starting to grind to a halt and their ability to deliver, maybe they are feeling the pressure. But I mean, hats off to the WGA negotiators because, chief among them, artificial intelligence is going to be regulated on some level. It doesn't mean it can't be used at all. Doesn't mean that there is completely forbidden from being used in any capacity. But most significantly, AI cannot be used for literary or source material. And the use of writer's material cannot be used to train artificial intelligence. So this means that they cannot feed work that writers have created for them into an artificial intelligence program to learn how to like mimic their style, their ability, their turn of phrase. That's great in my opinion. I mean, of course, unless somebody wants to sell their likeness into artificial intelligence, that's a different story altogether. That comes down to personal rights, but not having a choice in what you create being fed into a system that then can work against you and make it harder for you to be able to get jobs down the line, that certainly doesn't make sense. And the other interesting part is, as I mentioned, cannot be used for literary or source material. Now, I'd like to get somebody on the show in the weeks to come to talk about this in a little bit more detail in terms of definitions, because, most of us here in the world engaging in consuming media and entertainment, these are the kind of terminology, these are the kind of words that we're not typically used to. These are the kind of things that we wouldn't really hear about in, our everyday world, because you think of things in just it was a show, it was a movie, there was dialogue. as far as we can define for you here in this moment, that means the crux of the written dialogue and context and story. And then also, of course, anything that's done as a primer, meaning the source material is like, here's a primer. We want this to be written into X number of episodes or Y number of pages. Also, in addition to that, the company cannot require AI to be used, nor can a company give a writer AI generated material without disclosing that first. I'm super, super impressed that this came in here because I personally, just as a pundit, as an observer, I did not expect the entertainment companies to give up anything like this. I figured they're going to look at this like the golden goose and a way to make a lot of money without having to spend that much. But hats off to the WGA negotiators again. Other interesting tidbits as far as what was figured out and resolved within this is that there is a greater transparency in terms of streaming numbers, both domestically and internationally. This has been a big sticking point for a lot of time because the streaming services, especially Netflix, are kind of a black box. You don't really know how things are performing within them. And of course, that's always been a big part of residuals for working actors and writers has been, how did something perform, right? How well did something do? And of course, now they're being committed to transparency. And the work, if it is viewed by at least 20% of the streaming company's domestic subscribers within the first 90 days, I guess this is like your Wednesdays of the world, right? When there's a massive hit, then a bonus must be given on top of whatever else is in their existing agreement. The minimum weekly rate for staff writers and story editor executive story editors will increase, so their pay in general will go up. Additionally, a new tier for writer producers will have a higher minimum weekly rate. And then there's also an increase for staff writers. There's new requirements for the amount of staff writers to be employed by a series. Now, this is interesting. So there's now like certain levels of minimums, unless, and this is like the Taylor Sheridans of the world, people who are, doing something like 1923 and writing 10 episodes all by themselves, or, like True Detective has often been, then if there is not just one person writing it, this is kind of how it breaks down. It's a little complicated. There must be 3 people with it to be on a show at a minimum, if there's not just one writer. And then if there are 6 or fewer episodes, there must be 3. For 7 to 12 episodes, there must be 5 writers. And then for 13 or more episodes, there must be 6 writers that are a part of the team. So can't get away with having, fewer people have to do more work. Interesting to note because, of course, this means in some level writers can get back to work, but the SAG-AFTRA strike, totally unrelated, or at least theoretically, philosophically related, but not actually technically legally related in terms of the arrangement the WGA has just extracted with AMPTP, is still going on. And their latest statement is, at this time, we have no confirmed dates scheduled to meet with the AMPTP. When we do have dates confirmed, we will inform you. Unless you hear it from us, it's hearsay. And of course, I've said this before on the show, but just as a reminder, because some people are like, what are all these acronyms? Obviously, the WGA is the Writers Guild of America, and the AMPTP is the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. Those are the 2 organizations in this particular strike that have been negotiating. The AMPTP on behalf of the major networks and producers and companies that make content, production companies, film houses, all those things. And then, of course, the WGA being the union itself. In kind of the aftermath of this, just going straight into this, for some of you who maybe you don't engage so much with scripted content, dramatic works, comedies, big budget HBO shows, or even the movies, some people just live on a steady diet of talk shows or comedy talk shows. And the good news for everyone who's a fan of those is almost every major one of them is returning literally Monday. So while the strike has been going on, there has been a kind of loose affiliation that have comically referred to themselves as Strike Force 5. And this includes Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, Seth Meyers, John Oliver, and Stephen Colbert. And they did a podcast as a part of trying to help support their, writers who couldn't work because of the strike and everything that was happening in the strike. And ultimately, they made a joint announcement, somewhat comedically and not surprisingly, indicating that all of them would be back to work on Monday, October 2nd, except for John Oliver, who, since his show airs on, Sunday nights, would be back Sunday, October 1st, and that their shows would be immediately coming back to the air. Interestingly, just to point out, we talked about this a bunch in the last few weeks, that Real Time with Bill Maher, hosted by Bill Maher, of course, he had a couple of weeks back indicated he was going to return without writers and try to find a way to do the talk show without any scripted comedy, and then reversed that when the word came that the strike negotiations were progressing and that maybe they would be resolved. Well, of course, now that this has been announced, it's resolved. He's going to be back this very Friday, which means literally tomorrow is the point that I'm live streaming this broadcast. So for some of you who watch this on YouTube after the fact, it'll already have been back. So things are moving very, very quickly. Now, I know you're saying to yourself, Ray, what we need more of is more complicated contract negotiation news. I'm here to give it to you. I know. Hopefully the news is not always quite this dry, but nothing could be more cataclysmically important in terms of what people are able to make and live in a time with incredible, crazy inflation. So SAG-AFTRA has a division that's basically run under a thing called the Interactive Media Agreement, and this is a form of SAG-AFTRA Interactive. Now, this is another form of their union that is done for talent that works in the video game industry or other interactive arts. Now, this mostly affects, as far as anything we're kind of aware of in the average workaday world of playing video games, voice actors and motion capture artists. The talent that helps populate those ends of the medium. Video games cost a fortune to make, a ton of money, a ton of time. They are not in any way easy to be constructed. And as they are constructed, they cost, depending on the size of the staff, anywhere from a couple million to hundreds of millions of dollars. They're as expensive and profitable as any movie ever had hoped to be. And it's just a massive, massive, massive business. And there is, at some point, after a ton of time and sometimes years has gone into creating a story and making a game, then one of the last things that happens is voice acting talent is brought in to voice the characters. Nowadays, it's much more common than ever that there's actually voice talent behind the games that are made. And of course, if there's like a big, really elaborate game, like say The Last of Us, well, then these same people are usually in motion capture suits and their performances are being mapped and then animated. Well, they might also strike. We've been kind of hinting at this for a while. And as things have kind of rolled on, then negotiations between SAG-AFTRA and the big video game companies, you're talking your, Sony's, your Microsofts and Insomniac, Disney, Warner Brothers, Epic Games, Activision, Electronic Arts, they still don't have a new deal worked out that they're satisfied with. And in very comparable terms, it is a part of where things are in the world right now. Inflation having rocketed up last year and being a lot harder to make a living and survive than it used to be. The same old terms don't work as much. And of course, concerns about artificial intelligence and their work and their ability being replaced. The negotiator on behalf of SAG-AFTRA for this, Duncan Crabtree Ireland, had this to say: after 5 rounds of bargaining, it has become abundantly clear that the video game companies aren't willing to meaningfully engage on the critical issues: compensation undercut by inflation, unregulated use of AI, and safety. I remain hopeful that we will be able to reach an agreement that meets members' needs, but our members are done being exploited, and if these corporations aren't willing to offer a fair deal, our next stop will be the picket line. Now, here's what's really important to note. So there, 98% of the members of the SAG-AFTRA Interactive voted yes. But what's interesting to note, only 27% of the eligible members even voted. Surprised 3/4 sat this one out, or almost 3/4 sat this one out. Sounds pretty consequential to me. I don't know. Admittedly, I am not a union member, so there might be different politics in play that I'm not aware of. But what's important to understand about this is this does not mean a strike has begun. What this does is it authorizes the ability, since it's been voted on and approved, that if the negotiating body does not come back with a deal that everyone finds acceptable, then a strike can begin. So that may happen, may not happen. We'll see. We'll keep you posted as that develops, because obviously a lot of people play video games, just like a lot of people watch movies and television. But we'll see. Elsewhere in the world of music, a pretty consequential story that we haven't had a chance to talk to you much about here, and this has been kind of rolling out for a long time. Now, bands go on the road. An agent will help put together their tour, and promoters and venues will make offers. They'll arrange deals. They'll have contracts, and then they'll dress and stack up a tour. They'll rent a bus. They'll find the gear they need, the help. Tour manager, sometimes if they're a big band, maybe they have security, maybe they have extra support, maybe they have people who run VIP meet and greets. It's a huge production. It takes a long time to figure something like this out, and it costs a lot of money to bring people on the road. So either you're sleeping on the tour bus or you're paying for hotels for people. And of course, with inflation going absolutely bananas, everything is a lot harder than it used to be. even decently successful artists are saying things like they can't do it. They can't go on the road. Now, we've talked a little bit last year about how this kind of started with Animal Collective canceling a whole tour of Europe, essentially citing inflation as the reason why they couldn't get it done. And one of the things that's kind of been bubbling in the underneath is that there's a growing kind of trend in the concert industry where the venues where these bands would play would starting to put taxes, kind of like an extra commission fee, on their ability to sell their own merchandise. Now imagine you're a band, you're going out and you're playing, you're supposed to get paid to play the show, and then one of the things that makes the whole economic engine work is the ability to create merchandise that fans happily take and then becomes your own little walking billboard, right? Like this shirt from Between the Buried and Me that I'm wearing right now. This becomes something that ultimately people can take with them, and then they gladly celebrate or take as a memento from the show. And of course, this comes down to everything: CDs and vinyl and stickers and hats and sweaters, depending on what time of year it is. There's some very ridiculous things and some very cool things. And it's a big part of the business of making music, right? Because at the end of the day, anything in the world, it can only be a business if it's able to make money. Can't be on the road to lose money. Can't spend, 70, 80 days on a bus being broke and smelly, as Kevin Lyman from the Warped Tour once told me. You can't spend that time if there's not something to it after it. I'm sure there's an immense amount of satisfaction and elation, but no business, even any very independent minded band, sets out to go on the road to go, well, we hope we can just barely break even. Everybody wants to be able to make a living and survive. They want to be able to do this and be able to live comfortably so they don't have to do 330 shows a year. They want to be able to actually live and work. Well, apparently, as time has gone on, more and more bands have been complaining. And the first time that we heard about this came from Jack Antonoff complaining as the Grammys were happening a couple years ago, indicating that more and more venues were starting to charge too much for merchandise for bands. Jack Antonoff obviously being someone who came from Steel Train and, Bleachers and Fun, and, is a famed producer in his own right now. And he was one of the first people to comment on it. And more of these reports have been kind of bubbling up all over the place with bands and artists indicating how immensely unfair it is. And then very recently, Jeff Rosenstock was one of the people that ignited this conversation again recently, talking about how a lot of the shows on the upcoming tour that he was planning were going to be taking 20%. Now, when this happens, this doesn't mean that, well, the bands just make less money. No, that means they're going to have to charge more to ensure some measure of a profit margin. Once again, you don't make however many 10,000 t-shirts for a tour. I'm sure it's a lot more for bigger bands playing arenas to make nothing on it. Why go through the time, the design, the graphics, the creation, the shipment of them? They don't just appear at venues. You have to get them shipped somewhere. Someone has to take them, to freight them, the power and the time and the money to carry them, to inventory them, to organize them. No one's doing that just to break even. So one of the things that's really interesting that's kind of happened in the wake of this, and kudos to this company for taking the initiative here. I mean, this is probably going to be a developing story that's going to evolve in many different ways. But Live Nation, one of the biggest companies the entertainment industry has ever seen. And they already were years back when they were Clear Channel. They were on billboards and radio stations, and little by little, more and more in concert promotion, then eventually became the big rival to Ticketmaster, and then they bought Ticketmaster. And so in some ways, they are just a gargantuan giant in the world of entertainment. Live Nation announced that amidst their club venues, now Live Nation coast to coast has venues everywhere, some that they just lease or rent, some that they have exclusive rights to, and then many that they just own outright. And amidst them, there are 77 clubs that are theirs, and some of those also include things like, the Fillmore brand and then the House of Blues brand. That's all Live Nation stuff, if you did not know that, even though they were independent things at one point in their existence. Well, in these venues where bands are playing club shows, and where they're playing club shows in Live Nation venues, of course, where they have, control over what happens, that they are going to be taking no cut. This hasn't apparently started immediately, but apparently they're going to discontinue taking any percentage of merchandise sales. They're going to allow bands at that level of touring to be able to just take that, to have that, and to set their price wherever they feel is comfortable for their fans to pay, their profit margin wherever that profit margin is, and they get to keep it. Also, and this is really interesting, and I mean, economically, this is a handsome amount of money. I mean, when you really think about it, across how many bands, across how many tours, shows happening in every major city pretty much every day of the year. Every major metropolitan city, maybe not all 50 states, but, in at least a good 20 of them, they're going to be offering, this is apparently by the end of 2023, a $1,500 stipend per show for gas, travel, and other amenities. And additionally, in this one, we don't have any more details beyond what I'm about to say, crews, local promoters, tour reps, and more will be given unspecified bonuses. So apparently, Live Nation has dipped into their war chest. Been working in the music business for a long time. I can tell you, they certainly have the money. Now, why they're being so benevolent, that's a great question. But at least they're doing in some measure the right thing. Now, there is no indication of how long this will go on. Is this a permanent benefit of playing their shows, that extra financial incentive? Who knows? It could be on the other side too, that means that to be able to get this, there has to be I'm not saying this is like a stipulation on this, but they could just elect to not book bands that they don't think are going to fill the room. So maybe their own perception of who they're willing to book will, ratchet up because they want to make sure that there's still that profit margin for them. Of course, once again, Live Nation isn't a business of not being a business, right? They've only become the big superpower in the music business because they try to make money every single time they step up to the plate, right? Every time they take a swing, they're trying to get a home run. But for whatever reason, probably going to be immensely helpful for a lot of bands if the band, of course, doesn't have political reasoning why they're not happy with playing a Live Nation venue as it is. One group that is not happy about this is called NIVA, which is the National Independent Venue Association. Now, we weren't on the air when all this was happening during the pandemic, but as the pandemic was happening, there was everything was closed. Many of the concert venues across the country were worried about going totally out of business, and rightfully so, because no shows could happen, right? There was nothing that could be done in the arena of shows. And as that was going on, there started being a lobbying effort to lobby Congress for bailout money because, hey, if you don't do something for us, if this pandemic ever ends, this is going back, of course, to 2020, then we might not be here anymore. There might not be any place as part of the economy to have place for arts and entertainment. And of course, entertainment is really important in a country of 333 some odd million people. That is the United States of America. So NIVA, none too happy about what went down here. And, they had their own statement to issue. And it's a little curious. It's worth investigating. And I'm sure this is going to play out over many months, as I mentioned, as things go on. And there we go. Sorry about that. They had this to say: temporary measures may appear to help artists in the short run, but actually can squeeze out independent venues, which provide the lifeblood of many artists on thin margins. Independent venues and promoters are investing in and elevating up-and-coming artists every day, and NIVA is supporting those efforts nationally. The initiative announced yesterday may seem like a move to follow the lead of some independent venues. It is not that. Instead, it appears to be a calculated attempt to use a publicly traded conglomerate's immeasurable resources to divert artists from independent venues and further consolidate control over the live entertainment sector. Such tactics threaten the vitality of small and medium-sized venues under 3,000 capacity, many of which still struggle to keep their doors open. Independent stages, where the majority of artists, musicians, and comedians start their careers, are small businesses and nonprofits. They are continually facing rising costs, increased deceptive ticketing practice in the resale market, and ongoing challenges following the global pandemic. Our stages are critical to the live entertainment ecosystem and local economies, and they must survive. The economics of touring must drastically improve for artists and independent venues. There has to be a better way. NIVA will continue to support artists and empower independent venues as we collectively find it. Now, you notice the one thing you didn't hear mention in this, as they made this statement, they're not willing to stop charging a commission for merchandise. Obviously, this is a part of how venues are looking at staying afloat. And, we're not going to do a deep dive on the economics of concert venues. Maybe it's necessary, maybe it's not. But you don't hear them saying, okay, we'll match Live Nation under the notion of supporting artists in that respect. They make a fair point. Live Nation certainly can afford it. That's, as they once joked in The Wire, that's like Walmart coming to town. Live Nation has all the money they could possibly need in terms of making anything happen. So maybe it's a little bit unfair, but it's also still kind of a really benevolent move. So, I would imagine this is the first of many salvos as this issue plays out. And then lastly, as a bit of a follow-up to, stories we brought you in previous weeks, we talked a bit about the Blue Ridge Rock Festival and how there was all kinds of problems, weather-based apparently, where most of it didn't happen, right? And the first day, a handful of bands got played, a thunderstorm came out of nowhere, extreme weather, and then everybody got canceled for that day. Friday happened. All the bands played on Friday they were supposed to. But then Saturday and Sunday, before anybody got in there, plug was pulled on the whole rest of the weekend. Well, we want to characterize this as allegedly. There are reports of people allegedly indicating that they have had gastrointestinal illness in a long-going capacity. Allegedly. Many people have basically indicated or complained that coming on the wake of being at that venue, their gastrointestinal tract, their system, allegedly is still not working correctly. Now, is there any connection to what happened at the festival or not? Who knows? And how happened, whether there's any connection whatsoever to that, the Virginia Department of Health has opened an investigation. They are at least taking it seriously enough that they want to know if there's any connection. It doesn't mean that there is, but they are indicating that they have put up, I don't want to call it a poll, but an online survey, and they're asking anyone who attended the festival whether they are suffering gastrointestinally or not. Quote, "We ask all people that attended the festival to complete this survey, even if you didn't become ill. Collecting information on both those who became ill and those that did not become ill helps us identify and evaluate differences between the two groups." Now, there's a lot of speculation about a lot of things about this event and what went wrong. And of course, when things get canceled, people get mad. There's just no getting around that. When things don't happen the way that they're supposed to happen, people are not happy, and there's all kinds of complaints happening in that respect. One thing that we will say is that the festival issued kind of a nebulous statement of their own in the aftermath of this news, and they said, "Blue Ridge deeply regrets the unexpected turn of events that led to the festival's cancellation. The decision, although difficult, was taken in collaboration with an emergency management team comprised of local, county, and state officials, as well as venue representatives. It was a collective choice made in the best interest of everyone's safety, including attendees, musicians, and campers. Contrary to some claims, the decision was based solely on safety concerns caused by the weather." We'll have more for you as the story develops. I wanted to end off today with kind of a combination of a story and a speech. And this is something that kind of forced its way into my brain this week. I was working on various things and kept stumbling on videos, and I stumbled on the YouTuber The Charismatic Voice, who's a person who spends a lot of time looking at and analyzing different, performances and songs from a very, very educated singer's background, and then looking at what it'd take to make the voice sound that way. It's, just interesting content. And, watched as the host of that show as she started listening to a bunch of old Korn songs. Korn, the band Korn, Korn with a K, for those of you that are younger that might not be super familiar with the band Korn. And, it just got me thinking about the band and hadn't thought about them too much in a minute. And, of course, just lots of things going on across all the different things that we do here at Mixdown. But what was really kind of interesting to me is something that I have sermonized to a lot of the folks that have ended up writing for us or have been in charge of people or edited people here at Mixdown. I always give a very, very long speech about, who are we and what do we do in this world? And a lot of it has to do with our stubborn determination to be the most open-minded kid on the block. That's always been a big part of what makes Mixdown what it is. We wanted to look at every genre of music and every kind of music and every kind of person making music and to try to treat it as fairly as we possibly could. The idea was to not look at things with the blinders that so many do, either from this genre is the way, or from let's chase whatever is the most popular thing, whether it be Adele at one point or Beyonce at another, or now, of course, Taylor Swift. Also, not to be cravenly independent-minded, right? Like a lot of magazines have for a very long time centered themselves on trying to be like riding the wave of whatever the next big exciting thing is. Get excited about the Walkman. Oh, get excited about TV on the radio. Get excited about the Arcade Fire. And they're just constantly chasing the end of the dragon's tail. We've always just centered ourselves here at Mixdown and trying to just get it right. Whatever that is in the arena of music, and now, of course, movies and games and television as well. But in the arena of music, how do we just get it right? How do we talk about what's happening from all sides and all standpoints? And how do we talk about all genres and all sizes and statures? The effort to be, in some respect, a great equalizer, right? We're divorced from the trappings and the small-mindedness of following the crowd, but we also aren't afraid to say if something's really good if it's entirely mainstream. And you can look at us naming Gorillaz' album of the decade for the last decade. You can look at the fact that we loved Halsey's last record, Demi Lovato's last record. If something's good, we're not going to just be negative about it just because it's popular. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. The idea should be what is good. Now, one of the things that I mentioned in this is the band Korn. And hopefully you can see this. This is an original compact disc from the 90s. I bought this almost 30 years ago. That makes me feel old. When I was in high school, this is a compact disc that I bought right after this album came out. It was their self-titled album. And that was a big part of what I was into at that time. I liked metal, I liked rap. This was the beginning of the genesis of, rap and metal, or new metal as we called it. It was an exciting time to listen to music. Rage Against the Machine, Korn, the Deftones, and other things like that were happening at that point in the mid to early 90s. Well, Korn is often looked down upon by a lot of people that are self-professed music enthusiasts, music experts, music pundits, people who I end up meeting at events or around town in Los Angeles. I mean, the people who like to self-profess to themselves to be experts in this arena, or people who are obsessed with this arena. For some reason, there's something about the sound that just isn't cool enough for them. For a lot of them, there's some level of tunefulness, poppy accessibility. They're willing to go into adventurous territory to some extent, all different kinds of directions. But when it comes to real anger, when it comes to real fury, they can't have it. And there's been more than a couple instances in our history where writers have tried to come on and say derisive things like, this is music for people who are mad at their mommy and daddy, or music for, upset high schoolers who want to kill themselves. And, it's a pejorative kind of thing. I mean, and it's small-minded ignorance to think that way. It's fine aesthetically if you don't like the sound, if you don't like chugga-chugga heavy riffs, if you don't like yelling or screaming, or if you're not really looking to music to be something that speaks to darkness. But one of the things that I always tell people in terms of how we look at what we do here at this publication is there's probably something in the neighborhood, and this is certainly hard to quantify, 35 million people on this planet that are fans of this band. They can headline festivals in every country on Earth. It used to be everywhere but America, but now they can headline even in America as well. Sorry, I dropped my Post-it that I'm going to need for this. And that's not an insignificant number. I mean, it may not be Taylor Swift numbers, but you don't get that many people to like what you do if you're not doing something right on some level. And you think about it that way. As long as, it's not causing people to hurt themselves, it's not causing people to hurt each other, other people, it's not trying to strike divisions between people. If it's a vehicle for catharsis, which in Korn's case, they very, very much are, I mean, how could it be that bad? Doesn't mean you have to like it. Doesn't mean you have to go and say, I'll go buy the album and the t-shirt and go listen to it. But there has to be something to it if that many people can find joy in it. Perhaps the challenge is that it's hard to see past the trappings of what you find to be comfortable. Maybe you have things that you have trouble relating to in terms of the aesthetics or the need for that kind of approach, that kind of raw fury. But that doesn't mean that it isn't on some level wholly true for what these people are. Now, if you're in our position or you're doing journalism, you're doing coverage of something like this, it's different than being a fan. You can be as, particular with your finances and your time as you want to be. You don't have to go anywhere you don't want to go. That's what freedom is. You don't have to spend money on something you don't want to spend money on. But in our situation, we have to look at it a little differently because, once again, if that many people, and by my count before going on the air here, 10 million people on Spotify, 2.7 million people on YouTube, 1.4 million followers on Twitter, 12 million followers on Facebook, and over 3.1 million followers on Instagram. We're just not paying attention. If we're not looking at something like that dispassionately and trying to understand, why does it work? What about this is working for people and why they find it so resonant, right? It is incumbent upon us in what we do here every day to try to see past those things. Now, one of the things that's fascinating about Korn as a band, not to mention the fact that they're just obviously very good at writing songs within the pocket of the aesthetics they use. They know how to make songs interesting and enrapturing and engaging. Say what you will, you may not like the histrionics in Jonathan Davis's voice. You might not like the barking, a cappella rap thing that he does. You might not like the chugga chugga of J Monkey Schaffer's guitar. You may not like the way that they approach a very hip hop centric formulation of bass playing for, Fieldy, who is the bass player for most of the years of the band's existence. But they know what they're doing. They know how to make music that the people who are looking for that kind of thing love and want to hear it over and over again. A certain inherent infectiousness, right? So once again, going to the argument that regardless of the genre and the size, the stature, the rules tend to be the same. The songcraft tends to be everything, and you can make almost any variety of elements, even very uncomfortable, shouting or yelling or screaming or, grunginess or, turgidness or weird, scary sound effects. You can make it totally palatable and listenable because it has to do with songcraft. And they're obviously very good at it. So when I look at all of these things, and one of the things that I find to be kind of fascinating is that Korn was talking about things that in now a post-Me Too era world are just almost every day, when nobody wanted to talk about it. And they don't get very much credit for that. Talking about sexual assault and sexual violence, rape, talking about domestic violence, talking about being an outcast, talking about being persecuted, talking about being treated unfairly by people within one's own family, by friends, by a community. Nobody was talking about this shit in the 90s. I mean, in the 90s, everyone wanted to look every other direction other than that. No one wanted to even admit it was happening. It was this giant argument. When the Columbine massacre happened years later, it was this massive, go back and look at the media reports and what happened in that day. And it was an effort to look everywhere but what was happening in terms of our society. Blame songs, blame media, blame movies. No one would ever possibly do something wrong if there weren't those kinds of things influencing kids' minds. But really, nobody was ever taking the time to examine societally what was going on. So imagine if you're a person who has any idea what any of those things feel like. And God bless you if you do. I'm so sorry if you do, if you had to, if you've ever known, if you've ever felt that way. I'm so sorry, honestly, whatever that is. But imagine if you're that person and there's this entity where no one else has the courage to stand up, openly talking about it, how it would destroy a person, how it would wreck them inside out, and most importantly, try to contend with it. Try to find a foothold in this world. Try to find a way to be in this world in spite of that. Try to find a way to cope and to live and to grow, to get it out. I mean, Korn's always been a vehicle for catharsis. I mean, that's admirable, especially in a time when nobody wanted to talk about it. Nowadays, it feels like every time you turn on the TV, somebody's being accused of something, and, all the way to, a body positivity, kind of icon like Lizzo being accused of harassment by her dancers and things like that. Everywhere you look, there's some kind of accusation of something like this. But Korn as a band was talking about this long before anybody else was, quite courageously. So as I do what I do here every day and the belligerent search for all that is good, this is just one of those things that I find myself thinking about in terms of, people will talk a good game and people will say things about how open-minded they are. I like everything. Do you? Do you really? And I have to just on some level kind of just gently kind of nudge and wonder if people are as open-minded as they think they are. Is there the potential that there are things that, you just have your own I'm too good for that. I can't do that. And I'm not saying you have to. I'm not saying that there's some, moral high ground that I occupy because of that. But I do think it's worth always challenging ourselves to understand that context. And I mean, because understanding music or art and understanding what makes it resonant is also a part of understanding our fellow humans, mankind. What makes them tick? Why do they like what they like? What is resonant to them in that? And I would, once again, as I said it earlier, I'm going to repeat myself. If it isn't causing people to hurt themselves or to hurt other people, and that's not what its impetus is, it can't be that bad. There must be a good reason why people find it so resonant. So is there something in there that helps us understand at least better a disposition from a certain bracket of people that maybe we aren't so familiar with? I warmly embrace that challenge. every day. And that's kind of how, on some small level, I try to live my life. Just there's something happening. Okay, I'm going to go there. Let me try to get it. Doesn't mean I like everything. Hell, doesn't mean I like everything. Most things. I try to, with as many things as I can, though, to learn and understand why is that resonant and why is that happening and what does that do for people. It's just a great part of everyday living and education. But, of course, when it comes to entertainment, right, everything is subjective. It's everyone's personal time and money, and it's hard to see past the confines of that comfort zone, especially when so much of our cultural tradition here has to do with where things are played in communal spaces, right? Like things are usually tailored in communal spaces to be the safest formulation of things, the easiest way that everyone, standing in line at a Starbucks feels like they're not so upset that they have to spend money or they're standing in line. So it probably doesn't help that on some level society is kind of tuning us to those things instead of trying to say, how could something be richer and more different and more creative? That's all for episode 43 of This Week is Live. I'd like to thank you again for joining us, anybody who's here in the live stream, and everyone who ultimately comes and looks at this content, any of the myriad places that we package and post it and promote it anywhere in the weeks to come. As we always do, we have the show live here on Thursdays starting between 5:30 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. Pacific time, and then we ultimately put this all together and we post it on YouTube either Tuesday or Wednesday the following week. So we want to thank you for looking and engaging and listening wherever you do, whether it's here on Twitch as we're broadcasting live or on YouTube after the fact, or if it's in Spotify for podcasts, or if it's any of the places we post clips for this, whether it's YouTube Shorts or Twitter or Facebook. If you don't already, please follow us on Twitch. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. Mash that subscribe button and tell your friends, as always. We're going to keep doing this each and every week, and we'll have more special surprises, more guests, more interviews, more content, more stories, and of course, crap loads more headlines, because the entertainment is ever present and so is the happenings of a world that spins on. So please join us again next week, and we're going to have lots more for you. As I kind of indicated last week, that we might take a break once we get to episode 50. Next week will be episode 44, and we can't believe it either. We can't believe it's been this long, and it's been a year, and we've almost got 50 episodes here. It's really exciting, and it's really fun, but we hope that you join us again next week. So please come back next week at the same time. Thanks for joining us. So glad to see you well.